Hello, and thank you for joining us for this month's edition of The Scope of Things, a no-nonsense look at the realities and enigmas of clinical research based on those closest to the action who aim for great and, if need be, are willing to shake things up. I'm Deborah Borfitz, Senior Science Writer for Clinical Research News. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Professor Anna David, Director of the Institute for Women's Health at University College London, who understands the importance of including pregnant women in clinical trials and has been actively working to remove some of the roadblocks. Welcome to the podcast, Anna.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Great to be here talking to you.
Great. I think it would be safe to say that pregnant women remain a neglected patient group when it comes to clinical trials, and there are probably a lot of reasons for this. Trials involving pregnant women are more burdensome for study teams to conduct because there are two lives to consider. And from the standpoint of the study sponsor, there may be fears regarding a product's marketing approval being inadvertently jeopardized by their inclusion. The women themselves may be reluctant to participate, even if the opportunity arose. Have these been the key holdups, or is it even more complicated than that?
Well, I think that your last point about women not being reluctant to take part, I think that's a bit of a myth. And I'd like to bust that straight out of the water now and say my experience is that women are very keen to take part in clinical trials if it's going to improve the outcome for them and their baby. And, you know, women who are pregnant, they don't talk about a fetus. It's their baby, even before the baby's born. So just to give you an example of this, I had an experience doing a trial of a new therapeutic for early onset fetal growth restriction, which is where the baby is incredibly small in the middle of pregnancy. Mm-hmm. It was a trial called Strider, and it was looking at sildenafil citrate. Many of your viewers may know this a bit more as Viagra. Oh. And we thought that it was going to be quite difficult to recruit to this trial. But in fact, it turned out to be very, very easy and straightforward. Most of the women that I asked to take part in the trial who had a baby that was really small and potentially was going to die if they didn't grow, they agreed to take part. And in fact, we got through the trial a lot quicker than we had anticipated. So I think there is lots of evidence to show that, you know, when the chips are down, mums want what's best for them. But I agree there are huge issues. It's difficult. It is very difficult. You need to do long-term follow-up of both the mum and the child. And actually, you need to go out for 2 or 3 years. But as I say to pharmaceutical industry and regulators, you know, every single one of my patients is pregnant. And so I really want to make sure that they're going to have the best outcome for their pregnancy.
Oh, great answer. Thank you. You know, I believe the general standpoint of regulators is that the inclusion of pregnant women in trials is ethically justifiable, since overlooking them has real and potentially dire consequences for expectant mothers and their babies in the real world. I know in the U.S., the Food and Drug Administration issued guidance on this front 4 years ago and called the evidence gaps around pregnancy and medications a critical public health need. Do you know the current statistics on the involvement of pregnant women in clinical trials globally, and has the tide started to turn?
Well, I think the COVID pandemic really says it all. I mean, when the COVID pandemic occurred, pregnant women were excluded from all of the early COVID vaccine trials. And so that when vaccination was initially rolled out, pregnant women weren't called forward because there was uncertainty about whether the vaccines were effective in pregnancy and whether they were safe. And so it's actually, we know that women are generally excluded from clinical trials, particularly of new pharmaceuticals and vaccines. But I've got some good news on the horizon. So you will no doubt have heard about the human monkeypox virus.
Oh, yes.
The AIDS Clinical Trials Group, which is the largest global HIV research network, has expanded its focus to conduct research into COVID-19 and also into monkeypox, and just recently announced the initiation of a trial called STOMP. So it's the study of tecovirimat for the human monkeypox virus. It's a phase 3 randomized placebo-controlled trial evaluating the safety and efficacy of this drug for the treatment of human monkeypox. And hooray, it includes children and pregnant people, which is
Wow.
fantastic. So it's a real step in the right direction. But, essentially, most trials exclude pregnant women. And I think that was, the COVID pandemic really brought it home. Even now, the conditional marketing authorizations for COVID-19 vaccines in Europe don't contain contraindication statements, but the notes say there's limited experience. And so pregnant women were reluctant to have the vaccine. And also, pregnant women with COVID-19 were less likely than other COVID-19 patients to receive effective treatments like steroids, low molecular weight heparin, antiviral treatments, because of the lack of information available to clinicians and themselves about the impact on their child. But we know that actually COVID had a disproportionately bad effect on women, pregnant women, particularly women from economically deprived communities, mixed ethnicity groups. So I think we have to take it that this is an ethical problem. All people should be able to have access to the drugs that's right for them. But it has to be a risk-benefit perspective to meet what is the best thing. If a woman, pregnant or person, a woman needs a drug, we need to have the evidence to say that it's safe for her and her baby.
Right, right. Oh, wow. This is quite a dilemma for treating physicians. And, even when it comes down to whether you get a COVID vaccine or not. And I have friends that have faced this dilemma firsthand. And they were told one thing, then told another. And the evidence kept changing, or the guessing kept changing, I guess, because there was nothing to go on. And I guess bringing this point home, we have out there, I believe, only 2 drugs available to treat pregnancy-specific conditions, and the situation hasn't changed in decades. And there's therapies for a long list of health problems that are commonly encountered in pregnancy, everything from diabetes and hypertension and psychiatric conditions, and none of them have been tested on pregnant, or to a limited degree, been tested on pregnant women. And of course, that says nothing about the what's going on with the fetus and interventions that might be needed there before the fetus leaves the womb. What can you tell us about the challenges that treating physicians are facing, and how they're responding in the absence of information?
Well, I think in the absence of information, what people do, they discuss with their healthcare providers about what are the risks, what are the benefits of having some treatment. And the majority of drugs that I prescribe, I'm an obstetrician, I work with pregnant people, I look after them. The majority of drugs that I use actually are not licensed for use in pregnancy. We do have a lot of information about how they might work and how safe they are, but it's not systematically collected. And so women actually take a risk in some ways in taking medication. About 3 out of 4 women take some form of medication during pregnancy. And we know as society is changing and more women become mothers at older ages, pregnancy becomes more medically complex. And also these pregnant women may have one or more underlying health conditions that require continuing treatment. And so our pregnant populations are becoming more at risk of developing complications. And even if you have a straightforward pregnancy, you've got a high risk of complication in labour, for example, preeclampsia, hemorrhage, etc. So I think it's a tricky area. And what happens is that pregnant people make decisions in a vacuum of evidence. Very often their healthcare providers don't know the evidence. And so the women actually make the decision, take the risk that everybody else is ignoring. And I think that has to stop.
Yeah. Well, I'm aware of several initiatives underway that perhaps you can speak to that perhaps will start, turning the tide. The first is a project of the Innovative Medicines Initiative called, appropriately enough, Conception, where multiple industry and academic partners are attempting to create a trusted biomedical ecosystem to provide evidence-based information on the safety of medications during pregnancy and breastfeeding. In part by using existing de-identified data generated during routine patient care. And another is the Accelerating Innovation for Mothers Initiative, otherwise known as AIM, I guess, a new campaign working to end the stigma around conducting trials on pregnant women. And a third one, newer one, the ICH Working Group on Inclusion of Pregnant Breastfeeding Women in Trials. And I'm sure there's many more that I'm not even aware of. What can you share about these initiatives and others in progress on these multiple fronts, whatever you feel is most, top of mind for you or making the most difference currently?
Well, I think the Conception Project, which was funded by this Innovative Medicines Initiative, which was launched in April 2019, has been really good in pulling together information that there is about, existing information that we have about drugs. And it's providing sort of tools, online information that you can just basically log in and you can find out, okay, if I'm taking a drug, what are the risks? And this is great. So it's allowing women who are pregnant to make informed decisions about medications used before, during, and after pregnancy. And the Accelerating Innovation for Mothers initiative has also sort of trying to understand the landscape and challenges for pregnancy-specific medicines development and looking at the target product profiles. So that's basically trying to find out, how do we actually define what should be the safety for a particular drug and for the most important needs. I think the ICH development is really exciting. So that's the International Conference on Harmonisation. They've launched a working group in May of this year to look at how we might be able to include pregnant and breastfeeding women in trials. They're setting up an informal working group to finalise a concept paper, and then there'll be an expert working group which will actually try to develop the framework for how we can include pregnant and breastfeeding women in trials. I mean, it's going to take quite a few years to complete. But I think there's actually a lot of progress on this, and now we're working on actual finding solutions. So one of the areas that I've been working on is a team from Birmingham Health Partners called Healthy Mum, Healthy Baby, Healthy Future. And rather than concentrating on the difficulties, trying to think of solutions that we can come up with various problems. So, for example, we know that it's really difficult to get insurance for clinical trials. How can we de-risk this? Well, one option would be co-insurance with government, a collaboration between insurers and government to actually reduce the cost initially for insurers to insure clinical trials. I think also it's worth thinking about some solutions that come from paediatrics. For example, in 2007, the European Union launched the Paediatric Investigational Plan, or PIP. And that was a scheme whereby pharmaceutical companies that were developing a drug essentially had to consider, if the drug was appropriate, potentially appropriate for use in children, they had to consider how they might go about testing it out and looking at the safety. And that really improved the product pipeline for children's medicines. It created some 260 new medicines or indications for children since its launch. And the proportion of clinical trials in children rose by over 50% with this new PIP regulations. And, you could do something similar with drugs in pregnancy. So it would have to be thought through very carefully, but you could potentially come up with some kind of MIP or maternity investigational plan. So I think thinking about solutions to this problem is really the way to go.
These are all initiatives that sound like have gotten underway just the last few years, as though there's been a lot of coalescing of thought around this and interest that has been growing in this area that didn't exist prior to this time. Is there any reason for that over just the last couple of years?
I think it's coming together of lots of different groups who've been made aware of this, and the regulators have played a big part in this. So I think the FDA, the EMA, the MHRA have all come together with potentially similar solutions, but also I think there's been philanthropic investment as well, private finance initiatives, just to say, look, actually, we need to change what's been going on.
Yeah. Okay, now specifically at University College London, I hear you're spearheading research launched just last year where investigators are using a new grading system of sorts to monitor complications during clinical trials involving pregnant women. The idea here being to provide a standard vocabulary for the adverse events that can occur during pregnancy to allow better comparisons of safety data between studies, and to inform dosing in early phase trials. So tell me more about that. And also, what are the current known risks to pregnant women and their fetus?
Well, it's a really important point. I mean, it's crazy to think about it, but actually, when we first started to look at this, we realized that there was no vocabulary, if you will, to allow people to recognize safety. When you're looking at drugs in pregnancy or outside pregnancy, you want to know what are the complications that might be occurring when somebody takes a drug. And there are lots of different terminologies out there. So one of them is CTCAE, which is the common terminology of adverse events, which has got about over 800 definitions of complications that can occur. I know, amazing. When we looked at this, we realized that there was only 4 for pregnancy. So either your baby was small, was born early, had some sort of non-specific complication, or sadly your baby was stillborn. And that's really not enough. If you're developing drugs in pregnancy, you need to be able to have the terminology to use to define and grade complications. So we set up this international consensus group. We thought very carefully about the guidelines or the evidence that there was out there for maternal complications, of which there were quite a few, but very limited. And then we had a look about how you can grade complications in the fetus. So, for example, you might think about whether the fetal heart rate, the baby's heart rate, is going fast or slow, or how the heart function is, or whether they've got some kind of kidney problem that you can image and detect in the fetus before birth using perhaps ultrasound. And so we came up with the first standardized vocabulary called MFET, or Maternal Fetal Adverse Event Terminology, which we published in late last year. And we've been working with the regulators as well, and working with groups such as MEDRA, the Medical Dictionary Regulatory Activities, to map it to them. So this basically allows people who are doing clinical trials, so pharmaceutical industry, clinical academic health science institutes, if they do a clinical trial, they can monitor safety in the mum, in the fetus, and also there's some new terminology for neonatal adverse events. So that means that you can compare between trials. You can look at how adverse events occur at low dose, middle dose, high dose. And so you can really start to drill down into what are the actual risks that are going to happen. What are the consequences of this drug? Is it safe? Is it unsafe? And so it's a really exciting area because it's the first time that we've got a common terminology for testing out drugs in pregnancy.
How large is this universe of terminology, this vocabulary at this point, and how is usage of this scoring system going to be encouraged, or it is apparently going to be voluntary, not mandatory in any sense? How do you encourage adoption, if you will?
Well, I think certainly the regulators have really endorsed it. So we've had a lot of discussion with the FDA, EMA, and MHRA. In some ways, having the terminology out there means that it's available for people doing drugs trials to actually categorize adverse events. So there are 18 new terms, and each of them has a grading between 1 and 5. Okay. And so if, for example, you had a complication in the fetus, so the fetus developed a fast heart rate, you might grade that as a grade 3 or a grade 4. Mm-hmm. And then you can report that. Now, in terms of making trialists report that information, well, there's nothing that mandates it, but certainly if the terminology is there, they can actually use it to pick up the adverse events. So we've certainly had a lot of contact with pharmaceutical industry and trialists saying, oh, we'd love to see what this terminology is. And actually people have started using it and have responded and said it's incredibly helpful.
That's great to hear. Okay, now I wanted to jump next to this Everest Consortium that is looking to conduct the first maternal gene therapy trial, enrolling pregnant women whose babies are most severely affected by fetal growth restriction. I think you were talking about this as we started our conversation. I don't believe this trial is launched yet, but progress is being made toward that end. So I'm hoping you can give us an update on this and sort of the complexities involved in getting this off the ground, particularly with a pandemic, no doubt throwing a monkey wrench into plans.
Well, you're certainly right there. So in fact, the MFET terminology came directly out of this Everest consortium. So I've been working for a number of years, I'd say probably over 15 years, trying to develop a treatment for fetal growth restriction, which is where the fetus basically stops growing before birth. And we've been trying to develop a new drug approach using maternal gene therapy, so giving the mum gene therapy to improve blood flow in the uterine arteries that supply the uterus. And so yeah, it's actually been going okay, but it's taken a very long time. So we have talked to women, stakeholders, about what they think about this kind of gene therapy approach. It's important to realise we're giving gene therapy to the mother. We know it doesn't cross over the placenta, so we have some evidence from testing this out in human placentas in the lab that actually the drug doesn't cross over the placenta to get to the fetus, so it's only treating the mum. And we've talked to the women who've had and their partners who've had early onset fetal growth restriction and stakeholders, and not all of them, but a significant number would be happy to take part in a clinical trial of this drug. And really, the main thing they said was, it's great that somebody's actually developing a new drug for this condition, because so far there's absolutely nothing out there that can help make the baby grow before birth. We've also done some reproductive toxicology studies, so we've tested out to show what safety margins it might have, and we've shown that it's not harmful. And so we've manufactured the drug, and right at this moment, we're about to start testing it out again in a preclinical study, which was requested by the funders. So we've got the clinical drug, and we now want to test it out, final tests to say it works, it makes the fetus grow, it's not harmful, before we then go into humans. And we'll be using our MFET terminology to actually grade adverse events that we might pick up in the clinical trial.
Nice, nice. And how large is this trial going to be, and any best guess on when it's actually going to launch?
Well, the trial is actually going to be quite small because it's a drug that's never been used before in pregnant women. We would have to initially dose one pregnant woman, get the results, short-term results are two weeks after birth, and then do the next pregnancy. So it's going to probably be a maximum of about 15 women. I imagine that probably could take about 2 or 3 years to do, and we would start off at a low dose, then go up to a middle dose, and then go up to a high dose. So it'll be some time. In terms of cost, we're talking about probably £4 to £5 million. So a large amount of money.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of clinical trials that are already underway out there, either at University College London or elsewhere, I'm curious, which ones have you sort of most excited and hopeful about the future for women of childbearing age? Can you call out a few studies that are going on that are worthy of note?
Yeah, well, sure. I think it's a really exciting that there are lots of clinical trials that are ongoing with drugs in pregnancy. I mean, just to give you a few examples, we've got 2 studies, not led by UCL, but by other people, other groups. 2 studies, one of which is looking at different medication for blood pressure, high blood pressure in pregnancy, and another one looking at drugs to make the womb contract, so oxytocics to prevent postpartum hemorrhage. So that's just existing drugs trials, and they're going really well. You know, they're recruiting well. Women are signing up to these trials, even in on labour ward, where things move very quickly. It's stressful, but they are able to sign up, and consent can be taken. We're also looking locally at UCL at repurposing some drugs, so anti-transplant rejection regimens for women who have recurrent stillbirth due to placental inflammation, such as there's a condition called CHI, or chronic histiocytic endovillocytis. So it appears to cause stillbirth in a similar way to a sort of immune reaction. So we've been looking at repurposing these anti-rejection drugs. And then finally, some really exciting news is that we're doing some novel clinical trials of novel therapeutics for genetic fetal disease. So I've been working with the Boost Before team, which is a European consortium doing the first clinical trial of in utero stem cell transplantation for brittle bone disease, or osteogenesis imperfecta. And then another clinical trial, which is also happening in Europe and also in the US, is called ED-Life. It's a clinical trial of intraamniotic protein therapy for a genetic fetal skin condition. So both of these are basically, going to the regulators saying, look, we have a potential treatment. We know pregnant women are considering this for their fetus. And obviously, they need to be done very carefully, very slowly, assessing all the risks. But I think it's worthwhile realizing that actually these trials are happening. And I think it's a lot of progress in the field.
That is amazing. And I'm surprised there's that many studies going on, to tell you the truth. And I was also surprised at the beginning of this conversation when you were talking about how willing pregnant women are to enroll. But I know that there has to be some women out there that are hesitant, maybe not reluctant, but hesitant. Maybe you can end here. Do you have any advice for women who may be faced with a choice or a need even to enroll in a study or to consider whether to do it or not? And any sort of standard advice you have to share?
Well, I think it's important that it's completely their choice to take part in a trial. I think if you're offered the opportunity of taking part in a trial, you can be fairly sure that your healthcare givers really understand your condition, are really probably understanding very well the disease that you might have, or the problem that you might have, because they've had to do the initial sort of thought about where they sit on the fence. You're not going to recruit to a trial or run a trial if you think one treatment is better than the other. So they'll be really up to date with the evidence. And I think either way, we know that whether you're pregnant or not, patients who participate in trials, whether they're in the placebo group, the control group, or whether they're in the treatment arm, actually get a better care and better result overall. So I think it's really good to know that you're in a hospital or healthcare service where trials are being done, because you can be sure that your healthcare givers are really up to speed with the latest evidence.
Well, that's very comforting to women, I'm sure, needing to make the decision. Just they can make it just based on the facts and not any emotional reaction to what's going on. This has been great, Anne. I thank you so much for enlightening us about the imperative, really the moral imperative for pregnant women to participate in clinical trials. Excluding them is good for neither mothers nor their fetus if the health risks are simply being pushed into the clinical setting where there are no real answers to go on.
Well, I totally agree. And it's been a pleasure to speak to you and to tell you all about the new exciting stuff that's going on. There's real progress here. And I think with more joined up thinking, we'll really help our pregnant people.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your good work out there. So appreciate it. And as always, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening in. For more straight talk on studies involving humans, visit clinicalresearchnewsonline.com. And if you're a clinical research professional, we hope also to see you at our next SCOPE conference, where we make things happen. Bye for now.